The entire penthouse held its breath. Kang Ji-hoon, the iron-fisted dragon of the city's underworld, had just backhanded the delivery driver's scanner across the marble floor, his eyes burning with a rage that usually ended in a burial. He thought she was just another faceless worker from the slums. He thought she was a nobody who couldn't even meet his gaze. He was wrong. Instead of trembling or pleading for her life, Sloane Whitaker stood her ground amidst a sea of leveled handguns. She didn't call him chairman or sir. She looked the most dangerous man in the country dead in the eye and whispered a single jagged name. Not in English, and not in the polished Korean of the elite, but in a raw, gutter-born Busan orphanage dialect that Ji-hoon had spent 30 years trying to scrub from his soul. The room went ice-cold. The lead guard's hand froze mid-air, his finger hovering over his earpiece in a paralyzed glitch of protocol. In that heartbeat, the dragon's mask shattered. He realized this wasn't just a girl in a faded hoodie. She was a living echo of a blood-stained past he thought he had burned to ash, and she was the only person in the room who knew he was bleeding. The air in the obsidian tower, usually smelling of expensive tobacco and quiet filtered oxygen, was suddenly thick with the scent of ozone and pure, unadulterated shock. The obsidian tower didn't just scrape the sky. It seemed to pierce it, a jagged needle of glass and steel that loomed over the city like a silent judge. Sloane Whitaker adjusted the strap of her thermal bag, her knuckles white as she gripped the small, heavy parcel. The lobby was a tomb of polished granite where the air felt expensive and thin. She moved through the security checkpoint, her eyes fixed on the scuffed toes of her boots. To the guards in their razor-sharp suits, she was a shadow, a smudge of charcoal against a canvas of gold. She liked it that way. In this city, being seen was a death sentence. The elevator ride to the 88th floor was a silent ascent into the heart of the beast. When the doors slid open, the atmosphere shifted from corporate cold to a thick, vibrating dread. The penthouse was a sprawling expanse of black marble and floor-to-ceiling windows, but the view of the glowing city below was ignored by the dozen Syndicate members standing in rigid formations. The air was heavy with the scent of unlit cigars and the metallic tang of hidden weapons. At the center of the storm stood Kang Ji-hoon. He was a man carved from shadow, his long black coat draped over his shoulders like a shroud. But as Sloane stepped onto the plush carpet, she noticed the hairline fractures in the dragon's mask. His jaw was locked tight, and a single vein pulsed in his temple. He wasn't just angry, he was unsettled. A stray document lay shredded near his feet, and his lead guard, a mountain of a man with a scarred neck, watched him with an edge of nervous uncertainty. "The delivery is late," the guard barked, stepping into Sloane's path. He didn't see the young woman, he saw a delay in protocol. He reached out to snatch the parcel, his fingers digging into the cardboard. Sloane didn't flinch. She felt the eyes of the entire room boring at her, predators waiting for a reason to strike. She looked past the guard, past the guns, and locked her gaze on Ji-hoon. He looked at her with a bored, lethal contempt, the look of a man who had forgotten the taste of fear.
The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy weight that made the lungs ache. Ji-hoon took a step toward her, his heavy boots thudding like a heartbeat against the floor. He reached out, his hand trembling with a repressed fury as he prepared to dismiss the nobody who had dared to enter his sanctuary during a crisis. He thought he was in control. He thought the world obeyed his command. He was about to find out that some ghosts don't stay buried.
"You're late," Ji-hoon rasped, his voice a low growl that sent a shiver through the guards. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't have you thrown from this balcony." Sloane took a breath, the quiet resolve in her chest hardening into a blade. The shy girl was gone. "Because," she whispered, her voice cutting through the silence of the penthouse, "you're looking for a reason to live, Min-ho." The word hung in the air like a live wire, sparking against the suffocating silence of the penthouse. Min-ho. It was a name that didn't belong in a temple of glass and steel. It belonged to the dust of a Busan back alley, to the shared hunger of a dirt-floor orphanage, and to a boy who had died 30 years ago so that a monster could be born. The lead guard's hand, which had been reaching to shove Sloane backward, turned to stone. He stood frozen, his fingers curled into a half-claw, his earpiece crackling with a frantic status check he no longer had the breath to answer. Behind him, the Syndicate members looked as if they had been struck by a collective paralysis. Mouths hung open, eyes widened in a mixture of horror and bewilderment. They looked at the girl in the oversized hoodie, then at their boss, waiting for the inevitable spray of red that followed such a transgression. But the explosion didn't come. Kang Ji-hoon looked as if he had been turned to salt. The dragon of the underworld, a man who had survived assassinations and corporate wars without blinking, staggered back a half step. The stern granite mask of his face didn't just crack, it shattered, revealing a raw, jagged vulnerability that made the guards avert their eyes. His clenched hand, the one that usually signaled a death sentence with the flick of a finger, was motionless, white-knuckled and trembling against the fabric of his coat. "What did you call me?" Ji-hoon's voice wasn't a growl anymore. It was a hollow echo, the sound of a man speaking from inside a grave. Sloane didn't lower her head this time. The hunched shoulders straightened, the shy delivery girl dissolving to reveal someone who had carried this secret like a whetstone for a decade. "I called you by the name you used when you were crying for bread," she said, her voice steady, even as the lead guard finally found his nerve and leveled his weapon at her temple. "The name you used before you traded your soul for a black coat and a tower of glass." The lead guard's finger tightened on the trigger. "Give the word, boss," he hissed, his voice thick with the need to restore order. "I'll erase her."
Ji-hoon didn't look at his guard. He didn't look at the guns. He stared at Sloane, his eyes searching her face, looking for the ghost of the woman who had once protected that little boy in Busan. The air in the room felt ionized, the power dynamic shifting so violently it was almost physical. For the first time in 30 years, the most dangerous man in the city was not the one in charge. "Lower your guns," Ji-hoon commanded. It was barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of a mountain. "But boss," the guard started. "Lower them," Ji-hoon roared, the sound tearing through the silence. He stepped toward Sloane, his face inches from hers, the scent of expensive tobacco and old sorrow washing over her. "Everyone out now." The heavy double doors of the inner sanctum clicked shut, sealing out the confused murmurs of the Syndicate.
Inside, the office was a cathedral of shadow, lit only by the cold blue glow of the city skyline and a single amber lamp on a desk of dark obsidian. Ji-hoon didn't sit. He paced the length of the room like a caged panther, his long coat snapping at his heels. When he finally turned to Sloane, the vulnerability from the hallway had been replaced by a sharp, desperate edge. "Talk," he commanded, the word dropping like a stone. He moved into her space, his shadow stretching long and menacing across the floor. "That name hasn't existed for 3 decades. The records were purged. The people who knew it are buried. So how does a girl who delivers cold parcels in a dead-end district carry a ghost in her mouth?" Sloane felt the weight of his power, the sheer physical pressure of a man used to breaking lives, but she didn't flinch. The adrenaline was a cold fire in her veins. "You think you're the only one who survived that place. You think because you built a fortress of glass, the past can't find you." "I am not playing games," he hissed. He reached out, his hand hovering near her throat, not to strike, but as if he wanted to physically choke the truth out of the air. "Who sent you? Was it Choi? Are you a piece of theater meant to rattle me before a strike?" Instead of answering, Sloane slowly reached into the hidden inner pocket of her hoodie. Ji-hoo stiffened, his hand flying to the holster beneath his coat, but he paused when she pulled out not a weapon, but a small, tattered envelope. The paper was yellowed with age, the edges softened by years of nervous touch. She laid it on the obsidian desk between them.
With a look of profound suspicion, Ji-hoon opened the envelope. He pulled out a single, grainy photograph. It showed 2 children in a sun-bleached courtyard, a thin, defiant boy with a bruised cheek, and a slightly older girl with braided hair and a protective arm draped over his shoulder. On the back, in fading ink, were 2 names and a date from a winter that had nearly claimed them both. Ji-hoon's breath hitched. He touched the image of the girl, his fingers trembling. "Unji," he whispered, the name sounding like a prayer. "She was my mother," Sloane said, her voice thick with a decade of unshed tears. "She spent her whole life looking for the boy she called her brother. She died telling me that if I ever found myself at the mercy of the dragon, I should remind him of the boy who once shared her bread." Ji-hoon looked up from the photo, his ice-blue eyes searching Sloane's hazel ones. The suspicion didn't vanish, but it was joined by a devastating realization. The nobody standing in front of him wasn't an assassin or a spy. She was the only living link to the only person who had ever seen him as a human being. "She's gone?" Ji-hoon asked, his voice hollow. "6 years ago," Sloane replied, "but she kept her promises. The question is, Min-ho, will you keep yours?" The silence following Sloane's revelation wasn't a peace, it was the breath before a scream. Ji-hoon was still staring at the photograph, his thumb hovering over the faded image of Unji, when a low, rhythmic thrumming began to vibrate through the floor. It wasn't the city's heartbeat, it was the synchronized kill code of a digital breach. Suddenly, the cold blue skyline beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows vanished as the heavy emergency shutters slammed shut with a thunderous boom, plunging the office into a red-tinted twilight. The electronic lock on the mahogany doors hissed, the red light flashing, not a seal of protection, but a cage.
Min-ho, Sloane breathed, the old name coming naturally as the air grew thin. Ji-hoon didn't hesitate. He swept the photograph into his pocket and drew his weapon in a single fluid motion. "Get behind the desk, now!" The explosion didn't come from the door, but from the ceiling. A flashbang grenade tore through the vents, filling the room with a blinding white sear and a high-pitched ring that turned the world to static. Sloane dove for cover, her heart hammering against her ribs, just as the mahogany doors were blown inward.
Through the haze of smoke and red light, Sub-Boss Choi stepped into the room. He wasn't the panicked subordinate Sloane had seen earlier. He moved with the slow, arrogant gait of a man who had already won. Behind him stood the lead guard, the man with the scarred neck who was supposed to be Ji-hoon's shield. He held his weapon leveled, not at the intruders, but at Ji-hoon's chest. "The dragon has grown sentimental," Choi said, his voice a smooth, oily purr that cut through the ringing in Sloane's ears. "Wasting time with a delivery girl while the empire rots. It's a disgrace, Ji-hoon. Your father would have burned that orphanage to the ground just to be sure no witnesses remained. You sold your soul for a seat you'll never hold, Choi," Ji-hoon spat, his voice steady despite the 3 red laser dots dancing across his heart. The lead guard stepped forward, his face a mask of cold betrayal. "The men follow the money, Chairman, and the money says you're a ghost." Sloane, pressed against the cold obsidian of the desk, felt the weight of the parcel she had delivered earlier. It was still there, tucked into her bag. She realized then that the death threat inside hadn't been a warning. It was a beacon. The glass didn't just shatter. The entire world of the obsidian tower was being dismantled from the inside. "Kill the girl first," Choi commanded, pointing a gloved finger toward the desk. The lead guard's finger tightened on the trigger, but he never got the chance to fire. Sloane didn't think, she reacted. She reached into her bag and hurled the heavy, metal-bound parcel at the glass lamp, plunging the office into a sudden, absolute darkness. In the chaos of the red emergency strobes, she lunged for Ji-hoon's hand. Her grip was small, but like iron. "Trust me," she hissed, over the roar of gunfire that chewed into the obsidian desk. She didn't lead him toward the main doors, where Troy's men were funneling in. Instead, she dragged him toward the back of the suite, toward a service panel hidden behind a silk tapestry. To the Syndicate, this was a luxury office. To Sloane, who had memorized every freight elevator and maintenance shaft in the district to shave seconds off her delivery times, it was a map of escape. She kicked the latch, and the wall gave way to a narrow, lightless, concrete throat. They tumbled into the service shaft just as a hail of bullets shredded the tapestry behind them. The air here was thick with the smell of grease, damp stone, and the hum of high-voltage cables. It was a world of blind navigation, a vertical labyrinth that connected the penthouse to the bowels of the city. "You're leading us into a dead end," Ji-hoon rasped, his breathing heavy in the cramped space. He held his weapon forward, the muzzle flash of the red emergency lights reflecting in his eyes. "I've spent 3 years delivering to every floor of this tower without using the lobby once," Sloane whispered, her voice tight with focus. "The guards think in straight lines and security cameras. I think in blueprints and back alleys." She guided him down a series of rusted iron ladders,
her hands moving with practiced ease over the cold metal. Every few floors they heard the muffled thuds of Choi's men scouring the hallways, their boots echoing like thunder against the walls of their narrow sanctuary. Sloane counted the levels by the vibrations of the elevator cables. At the 42nd floor, she stopped, prying open a vent that led to a secondary laundry chute. "If we hit the garage, we're dead," she cautioned as they slid through the narrow opening. "Joy will have every exit blocked with armored SUVs. We're going lower, under the foundation." Ji-hoon looked at the girl in the faded hoodie, seeing the raw, tactical brilliance hidden beneath her shy exterior. She wasn't just smuggling him out, she was outmaneuvering an army in a terrain they had never bothered to learn. As they reached the bottom of the chute, the smell of the city, rain, exhaust, and old earth drifted up to meet them. They weren't out yet, but for the first time the dragon wasn't leading the way. He was following the ghost of a girl who knew exactly how to disappear. The safe house was a cramped, forgotten basement apartment in the garment district, lit only by a buzzing fluorescent tube that cast a sickly green light over the peeling wallpaper. Ji-hoon sat on a threadbare sofa, his bespoke coat torn and stained with concrete dust. For the first time in 30 years, the dragon looked small.
Sloane moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency, pulling a first aid kit from beneath a loose floorboard. She didn't ask permission, she simply knelt before him and began to clean a shallow graze on his temple. The silence between them was no longer a vacuum of dread, but a space filled with the ghosts of a winter 30 years past. "She used to do that," Ji-hoon murmured, his voice cracking as he stared at a water stain on the ceiling. "Whenever the older boys would corner me in the courtyard, Eun-ji would find a way to steal a bit of antiseptic from the infirmary. She'd tell me that as long as I didn't cry, the wounds didn't count." Sloane paused, her hand hovering near his face. "She never stopped talking about you. Even when the fever took her mind at the end, she was calling for Minho. She thought she'd failed you because she couldn't find where the Syndicate had hidden you." Ji-hoon reached into his pocket and pulled out the tattered photograph. He looked at the girl with the braids, the only person who had ever stood between him and the cold cruelty of the world. "I didn't think anyone was left. I thought that by becoming Ji-hoon, I had cut every thread that could lead back to that boy. I thought I was protecting her memory by staying a monster." He looked at Sloane, really looking at her now. He saw the same stubborn tilt of the chin, the same quiet fire in the eyes that had defined Eun-ji. She wasn't just a girl who knew his secret. She was the living legacy of the only love he had ever known. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had spent a lifetime building an empire of glass, but the only thing that actually mattered was standing in a basement, wearing a faded hoodie and holding a roll of gauze. "You are her blood," he whispered, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch the silver chain around Sloane's neck. "You're the pact we made. We promised we'd never let the world break us." Sloane met his gaze, the distance between the delivery girl and the Mafia boss vanishing. "The world tried, Minho, but we're still here." The moment of quiet was shattered by a sharp, rhythmic chirping coming from the floorboard. Sloane froze, her eyes darting to her discarded delivery bag. Inside, the metal-bound parcel she had used as a projectile in the office was glowing with a faint, pulsing crimson light. "The parcel," Sloane whispered, her face going pale. "It wasn't a death threat. It was a Trojan horse."
Ji-hoon was on his feet in a second, his gun drawn, but Sloane grabbed his arm. She tore the package open, ripping through the layers of cardboard to reveal a sleek, military-grade GPS transponder embedded in a block of lead. It wasn't just a tracker. It was a master key, a device that broadcasted a signal powerful enough to bypass every localized jammer in the city. Choi hadn't been looking for them. He had been following the breadcrumbs she had carried right into their sanctuary. "They're coming," Ji-hoon rasped, the sound of screeching tires echoing from the alleyway above. "We have to move." "No," Sloane said, a dangerous light sparking in her eyes. "If we run together, they'll pin us down in minutes. They're tracking the signal, not us. I know this city's blind spots. I can lead them into a ghost hunt while you get to the Loyalists." Ji-hoon gripped her shoulder, his fingers digging into her hoodie. "I won't lose you again, Sloane, not after finding you." "You won't," she promised, already grabbing a spare delivery vest from the corner. "I'm a ghost, remember? And ghosts are hard to catch." She snatched the pulsing tracker and bolted for the back exit. Outside, the rain was a torrential curtain, turning the neon lights of the garment district into smeared watercolor. Sloane didn't hop into a car. She grabbed a discarded electric scooter, weaving through the narrow, trash-strewn alleys at a suicidal pace. Behind her, the roar of black SUVs signaled the start of the hunt. She led them through a labyrinth of one-way streets and pedestrian plazas, the red pulse of the tracker a lure for the predators. She felt the surge of adrenaline as she skimmed the bumpers of cross-traffic, drawing the Syndicate's heavy vehicles into the congested bottlenecks of the midnight rush. Every time they closed the gap, she disappeared into a subway entrance or a service tunnel, reappearing blocks away. She was the master key, and she was unlocking a city of decoys. As she tossed the tracker into the back of a long-haul truck headed for the bridge, she looked back at the pursuing lights. The dragon was safe, and the wolves were chasing a shadow. The neon rain slicked the streets as Sloane met Ji-hoon in the shadow of a rusted bridge, the roar of the long-haul truck fading into the distance. The SUVs were gone, lured away by the ghost signal, leaving the heart of the city momentarily unguarded. Ji-hoon stood beside a blacked-out sedan, his face a mask of cold, focused iron. He didn't say a word as she approached. He simply opened the door, a silent acknowledgement that the girl in the hoodie was now the only partner he trusted. The obsidian tower loomed ahead, a fortress under siege by its own shadows. Choi had locked the building down, believing his prize was trapped outside. He didn't account for the girl who knew the veins of the building, nor the man who had regained his soul. They didn't enter through the lobby. They slipped through a sub-basement intake valve, moving through the humid, thrumming gut of the tower. As they reached the security floor, the air grew tense. Men in suits patrolled the corridors, their eyes darting nervously. These were the rank and file, men caught between a dying king and a rising usurper. Ji-hoon stopped at the junction of the main hub. He looked at Sloane, then reached for the intercom system that bypassed Choi's digital encryption, the analog emergency line. "I won't use a gun to take back my house," Ji-hoon whispered, his hand hovering over the broadcast button. "I'll use a memory." He keyed the mic, and his voice filled every hallway, every elevator, and every hidden room of the tower. It wasn't the booming command of a chairman. It was a low, steady cadence.
He began to recite the orphanage roll call, names of children long forgotten, names that only those who had served him for decades, the ones who had risen from the same dirt, would recognize. "Min Ho is at the gate," he finished, his voice echoing through the steel. "The dragon is home. Decide who you serve before the lights come back on." The effect was instantaneous. In the monitors, Sloane watched as guards hesitated. The lead guard, standing outside the penthouse, lowered his weapon, his face pale. The old name acted like a virus, crashing Choi's authority from the inside out. Doors began to click open, not by force, but by the hands of men who remembered the boy before the monster. They moved upward, a silent siege that required no bullets. As the elevator rose toward the 88th floor, Sloane felt the shift. The dread was gone, replaced by a heavy, reverent silence. When the doors opened, the hallway was lined with men bowing their heads. Choi was trapped in the office, a king of nothing. Sloane stepped first, no longer a delivery girl, but the herald of a man who had finally come home to himself. The doors to the inner sanctum didn't blow open this time. They glided apart with a whisper of precision. Inside, the red emergency lights had been purged, replaced by the sterile, unforgiving white of the tower's full power. Sub-boss Choi stood behind the obsidian desk, his face a sickly gray. The lead guard lay face down on the carpet, neutralized by his own men, loyalists who had remembered the boy from Busan the moment the orphanage roll call echoed through the vents. Choi reached for a hidden weapon, but Ji-hun was faster. The dragon didn't roar. He acted with the terrifying efficiency of a man who had reclaimed his purpose. A single shot rang out, muffled by the heavy drapes, and the usurper slumped into the chair he so desperately craved. The coup was over, settled not with a war, but with a surgical strike.
Ji-hun stood amidst the wreckage of his office, the smell of cordite mixing with the rain-scented air clinging to Sloane's hoodie. He turned to the guards lining the walls, the men who had hesitated, the men who had watched the girl in the faded clothes lead their king back from the brink. "Clean this room," Ji-hun commanded, his voice regaining its granite authority, yet tempered with something softer. "And remember the face of the woman who saved the dragon. From this day, she is not a ghost. She is the shadow that sees what you cannot." He walked over to the desk and picked up the small, tattered photograph of Un-ji. He placed it carefully in a silver frame that previously held a cold corporate award. Then he looked at Sloane. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights reflecting in her hazel eyes. She looked tired, her cargo pants stained with the city's grime, but her shoulders were no longer hunched. "You delivered a package that nearly killed me, Sloane," Ji-hun said, walking toward her. He stopped a respectful distance away, his hand no longer clenched, but open. "But you also delivered a soul I thought was dead. I cannot offer you a return to the life you had. You know too much, and the city is too dangerous for a ghost with your face." He gestured to the obsidian table, the seat of power for the most lethal syndicate in the country. "Stay, not as a servant and not as a shadow. Be the heart this empire lost. Help me build something that wouldn't make your mother weep." Sloane looked at the hand of the man she had called Min Ho.
She thought of the bikes she'd ridden, the packages she'd dropped, and the invisible life she'd outgrown. She reached out, her fingers locking with his in a pact that was 30 years in the making. The shy delivery girl was gone, and in her place stood the hidden heart of a new order. The dragon had his queen, and for the first time in history, the tower had a soul. The war for the city was just beginning, but as they stood together overlooking the neon sprawl, the silence was no longer a threat, it was a promise. The story of Sloane and Ji-hoon teaches that true power lies in the resilience of the human soul and the strength of shared history. While empires of glass and iron can be dismantled by betrayal, the bonds formed in shared adversity, like those in a Busan orphanage, remain an unbreakable foundation. Did Sloane's transformation from a ghost in the shadows to the heart of the dragon's empire leave you breathless? If you were moved by this journey of loyalty and redemption, smash the like button and subscribe to join our syndicate for more high-stakes stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe our past eventually finds us, or can we truly bury our ghosts? Hit the bell notification so you never miss a delivery from the Obsidian Tower.